All right. Welcome to the Fall Book Club. Today we're going to be talking about George Orwell's 1984. But Brooke, hold yours up because this is better than mine. Yeah. So
Mine's
hopefully you
way
see
cooler.
that. Yeah, this was a book that I read in last summer, so a year ago. And Brooke, you've read it before, haven't you?
Yeah, I read it whenever I was in high school. So
They
a long
had me
time ago.
read Animal Farm.
That's what we read too. I wasn't supposed to read this, and that is why I read it because it wasn't for school.
What did you have to read in high school, Ryan? Was it any George Orwell?
Animal Farm.
Animal Farm?
Yeah, sophomore year.
That's what we read too.
Yeah. They're quite different. Like the
Yeah.
writing style between 1984 and Animal Farm was really surprising. Animal Farm was like a child's book
Yeah.
in a lot of ways with the way that he talks about all the animals and stuff. So, yeah. All right, to begin, we're going just so I can remember to say this because I forget all the time when we do these really long videos.
Yeah.
That if you're here looking for like good summaries of the book and learning the contents of the book for some kind of examination in high school, this is a great video resource for you. There will be notes and time codes in the description that you can use to navigate chapter to chapter. So the way that this particular book is broken up into three books, as it says, but they're really just large chapters, and then sub-chapters that make up those three books. So today we'll be covering Book 1, sub-chapters 1 through 8, I believe. So to begin, I will skim through my very long summarization of sub-chapter 1 of chapter or Book 1. So the main character, Winston, describes an odd, futuristic world with plenty of sleep technology. The outside environment is cold, a tad windy. A harsh summer has just come to an end. Winston describes huge posters greater than 8 feet in height are pasted to nearly every outside wall on nearly every building in the city. A handsome and sharp-looking middle-aged man with a mustache looks out at everything. The eyes are stationary, and yet they seem to be designed in a way that followed a man as he walked by. They say, "Big Brother is watching you." There are telescreens watching and listening to everything that everyone is doing within their vicinity. There are airborne patrols that make their way around the city, peeking through civilian windows, which I'm guessing are helicopters. And a big public place is certain for a time of day strikes called 2 Minutes Hate, in which everyone will watch on their closest telescreen or gather in the streets to the larger screens, and they will see an image of a man by the name of Emmanuel Goldstein, or Goldstein, which I don't know. Would you go Goldstein or Goldstein?
That's what I said. Goldstein.
Goldstein. And it's this guy that they should hate and be opposed to because he's responsible for all of the bad things in the world. He's like the rebel against the current government and Big Brother that causes all evil in the world. He's basically like this Lucifer character in rebel form. And they're supposed to cry out obscenities and hate and scream at the top of their lungs and get all, riled up and angry at this. And that lasts about 2 minutes. So that happens, and then what else? Big Brother's graphs. No one knows for sure where he is hiding, Goldstein, but he is certainly still alive and well. So there's all kinds of conspiracies that go around about him. Many of his rebels are uncovered nearly every day here in Oceania, giving continual sustain to his cause. He's a caricature of a weak yet villainous enemy. He has a small white goatee and small glasses that sit at the end of his long Jew nose. His hair is balding and white. He looks frail and silly. Anyone with any sense could detect that 2 Minutes Hate is a blatant, undisguised propaganda, but just believable enough that someone not so witting as yourself, as Winston, might just fall for such lies. Everyone in the room is pierced by sickness and pain just from looking at Goldstein's face. They're all possessed by some demon of vile hatred. Winston encounters a man he has met many times before but has never spoken with. O'Brien is his name, and he has a look about him of trustworthiness and the capacity of confidence. Some great contrast is made by his companion's body and on his face. He has a rather disarming mannerism with which he adjusts his glasses. They make eye contact during the 2 minutes hate, and as if by telekinesis, they communicate a great deal in only a fraction of a glance. Winston suddenly thinks that O'Brien knows exactly what he is thinking and feeling, but he didn't pursue it any further for fear the thought police might catch him. And Winston had been observing sharply what he suspected might amount to evidence of Goldstein's rebellion, but he couldn't know for sure. Slight handshakes might be the tactic for the Brotherhood to communicate with one another. Winston buys a pen with a real nib and ink and a book without words in order to start a journal, building up the courage to do so for literally years. Though nothing was illegal, such an act would get him killed if caught by the thought police. At first, he had extreme difficulty putting his years of thoughts and feelings to paper. Then, in form of free thought association, he puts down some seemingly nonsensical expression of a film he had seen, likely some more propaganda. He then writes in all capital letters, "Down with Big Brother," about 4 or 5 times, and this caused him an even more anxiety. It would get him in no more severe punishment than starting the journal itself. Suddenly a knock comes to the door. He is paralyzed by fear, yet his face out of habit remains expressionless. He should not delay. To do that would be the worst thing. He moves heavily to open it. So that's kind of like the establishment of the story of like the world that we're in.
Mm-hmm.
So Ryan, you haven't read this before, have you?
No.
So what did you think about it for first impressions?
It's definitely a slow burning story. Doesn't rush kind of into anything in particular but it does a pretty good job of kind of building the world you're in. A lot of stuff is left kind of mysterious, but I think that's kind of on purpose. Orwell himself, I mean, almost all of Orwell's later books are very allegory based. So I think he leaves kind of things broad on purpose to kind of make it more timeless, and kind of you can plug it into any position. Just kind of this kind of stuff in there like that. But I thought it was okay. Like I said, a little slow for my taste of getting there, but it does its purpose, as its first chapter should, introduce you to the world. Especially this is dystopian. This is, I think, Orwell's only, I guess you can, really, if you want, you can categorize this as a science fiction book. Mm-hmm. It's kind of dystopian, futuristic stuff, and it's not a style Orwell ever wrote in. He wrote in memoirs, and Animal Farm, of course, his other most famous one is an allegory story, a children's book. So with this being his work in the science fiction, it shows no technology kind of explained as all stuff that is unique to the period he wrote this, which would have been in right before 1950. So like helicopters, stuff like that. Usually science fiction writers, especially in the 40s, the atomic era, had these grandiose ideas of the future, the technology of the future. You know, the 80s, they thought flying cars, Jetsons, and stuff like that. But Orwell doesn't show that within this book. He's not a science fiction writer. So kind of stuff that I kind of picked apart in the first chapter, but it does its purpose, setting up the world.
Yeah, and you had talked to me earlier about like something that you noticed about its language just being kind of like bland. Mm-hmm. Was that like a problem for you reading it?
Yeah. And like I said, I don't know if he's doing it on purpose, because the character is supposed to be waking from kind of this programming. If the language and the tone is just bland because that's the world that they live in, or if that's just how he's writing it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What do you think, Brooke, about the language?
I think it's definitely done on purpose. Reading it before, I think it definitely changes throughout the book as Winston changes. I think it is supposed to be more of a slow burn at the beginning, because he doesn't remember everything he experienced just yet. He's having flashes of things that have happened, like the piece of paper that proved that history is being changed.
Right.
And so as he's learning more about his own memories and stuff like that, he, the language in the book changes a little bit. It starts getting more intense because there are some parts in this that I'm on the edge of my seat reading a book and I'm like, oh my God, what happens? And I'm like, oh, I've read this before. I know what happens. But, yeah, so I think it's definitely done for a reason. And, I mean, Orwell's a great writer. And I think Animal Farm definitely had in his writing what he wanted to convey through more than just the characters themselves. And so it's also through storytelling and how he writes it. And so I think that it's done purposefully.
Yeah, it's hard to tell, because it's one of those things that I kind of waffle back and forth on, because some people criticize the book on the grounds that it has very dead poetic form, where there's not a lot of flowers in the words that he uses. It's not grandiose in its poetic form, and so people don't like that. But I don't think that every story needs to be flashy, and that a lot of stories, some of the best stories ever, are straightforward in their language. This book seems to be particularly straightforward and bland. And the only argument that you could say against that, like you're saying, is that it was done intentionally to say, maybe try and reflect the overall tone and color of the world that Winston occupies. Is that everything is dark and gray. The architecture is dominated by brutalism, and there's just nothing but long uninterrupted lines and flat concrete.
Yeah.
So of course the language needs to be long, uninterrupted, and flat and concrete.
Yeah, and there's nothing unique in the world because they've taken out everything that is unique to make it a very cookie cutter world. Everyone is the same. Everyone has the same thoughts.
Yeah. So here's a good question. What would happen if, say, George Orwell did take a more freedoms in the poetry of his writing, and he did write it in a way that was more beautiful? First of all, could he even do that in describing such a bland world? And if he managed it, how would that alter the way that the story comes across? Would it be such a big change?
I think, during the atomic era is kind of the birth you see of futuristic novels. Brave New World is one of the first ones that come to mind, and that's kind of a book I prefer over 1984 because of its descriptiveness and its, like I said, and what I go back to is George Orwell is not a science fiction writer. Right? He wrote before you got 1984 is one of his last books he wrote. The 3 years before that, he wrote Animal Farm in 44, published in 45, but he actually wrote it, trying to get it published for that whole year. Before then, it was personal accounts, Homage to Catalonia, stuff like that. So I think it would have changed, but definitely because of the subject matter, 1984 has made its niche in classical literature.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll hopefully be able to get to Alex Huxley's A Brave New World at some point, if you guys are willing to do that, because I actually want to go through all the dystopian novels,
right?
Including, I would like to do this one, and then A Brave New World, Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugs, and then maybe we could end on
Fahrenheit's a good one too.
Oh yeah, Fahrenheit.
I hate Fahrenheit.
454?
451.
450. Sorry, I haven't read it. 451, and then we can
It's
end
fine. I said
with
Fahrenheit with no numbers because I forgot what the numbers were.
Yeah, exactly.
So I just left it.
Well, you don't know
who
the
wrote
temperature
it.
at which a book burns.
Oh yeah, sorry.
It's
Pardon me. I honestly don't even know when
Ray
water boils.
Bradbury. Is that his name?
Yeah, Ray Bradbury. That's correct. And then
I had to read that book 3 times.
Why?
In 3 separate grades.
Gross.
Yeah.
Why would
I hate that
you
book.
inform your teachers that they?
Yes, and they were like, Oh, well, I chose this book.
Well, I'm gonna get you to read it a fourth time.
Why me?
Just for the laughs, and then we can end with A Clockwork Orange,
Yeah.
Okay.
and that would be a good end for it.
I think something unique about 1984 though is Orwell. The older he gets, he is less ambiguous with his allegories. See, Animal Farm doesn't really come out and state anything. It's just, if you know who Orwell is and you know his history and what kind of led him to write the book, you kind of figure out who the characters are representing. Where in 1984, it's very, very on the nose. I mean, you know what I mean? The Big Brother is a guy with a large mustache. Emmanuel Goldstein, goatee, small glasses. I mean, it's very in your face of who he's representing. I mean, even in the book, not only we've got to it, but the organization is called INGSOC, which is a shortening of English socialism. Oceania. Of course, the book takes place in England, but everything is just kind of more in your face than Animal Farm is.
I
what
definitely
do you think
agree with that.
resulted? Like, what made Orwell like move away from more ambiguous allegory into the realm of like more potent and obvious or overt propaganda?
So the main reason why Orwell wrote Orwell first. A little bit of history about the guy that wrote the book. He, of course, he's from England. He grew up and spent some time in India when it was controlled by the British. From there, he went back to England, considered himself a socialist. Did a few works there, then traveled to Spain to fight in the Spanish Civil War, which was between leftist forces, it's called the Loyalists, and then fascism, the rise of fascism in Spain. He fought alongside with basically some Trotskyist forces that followed Leon Trotsky's idea of global revolution. The anarchist Trotskyists ended up losing, again, kind of pushed out by more of Marxist-Leninists, were people that followed Lenin and Stalin's train of thought. From there, he absolutely hated Marxism-Leninism, despised Stalin, felt that they pushed him out of the leftist discourse around that time, and made it his mission to write whatever he wanted about books. Well, he wrote Animal Farm 44. Of course, during that time, he had World War II going on. From there, he tried to get it published. No one would publish it. A reason why we're allies with the Soviets at the time, they were fighting a big portion of the Eastern Front. No one wanted a book to be published bashing the Soviet Union. They were the good guys at that time. But of course, the war ended, and then the global shift became the enemy, the Soviet Union. So then they allowed him to publish it. So once that book published, it became common reading material amongst classes, and the government's kind of pushed that book to the forefront for people to read anti-Soviet literature. Then from there, they gave him the green light to write another book. So, in my opinion, the reason why you see 1984 is a little bit more obvious is because he didn't have to hide the allegories. See, in Animal Farm, he had to hide it because being anti-Soviet during World War II was not very acceptable. Right. Post-World War II, 100% acceptable.
Right. I see. Huh. So I guess we should make it too like a distinction between like the various forms of art that there are in the world, or the lack of art. So for me, I feel like it might be odd to say this, but I do consider 1984 to be blatant propaganda.
100%.
Yes.
Right.
100%.
But I'm all for it because I happen to agree with the propaganda within the book, and so, but if there's some kind of form of media or something like that that's attempting to convey an explicit message for some kind of motive, some ulterior motive, then that would be a form of propaganda. Mm-hmm. If it were some form of art, if we were to read, I don't know what book, maybe like a Dostoevsky novel would be an exception to this, where there are so many positions that are presented and they're so strong, all of those positions, that it would be impossible to consider it propaganda because there's no straw man within it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Every single person that is presented in the story that has their own philosophy is as strong as they possibly could be. And also, if the artist himself didn't know exactly what he was even trying to express, that would just be art. So it's really sad that it's less and less. I don't even know where to find actual art anymore. Where like there's always people. I feel like even when people are teaching other people how to write or tell stories, it's always like, well, what message are you getting across?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, maybe that's not the right question to be asking, because it's like, well, maybe we don't want to tell a story. We don't want to just, pursue something for superficial means. We should have something that calls to us and expresses. Anyway, it's propaganda and it's pretty good. So
Yeah, good propaganda.
yeah, so I just think that should be got out of the way, because there's so many people, like if it's conservative or liberal, are like trying to debate whether it's propaganda or not. It definitely is. So anything that wants to get something across that's explicit, it's a message, it's propaganda.
Well, like
It could be good or
everything is
bad.
propaganda now.
Yeah.
So
If it has rhetoric use, then that's what it is.
yeah.
But it could be good or bad. So, yeah, I think that the world that we find ourselves in is pretty bleak at the moment. Winston seems like he's not in very good sorts. I thought the 2 Minutes Hate was a pretty stressful part of the book.
Oh yeah.
I don't know, like, I guess the purpose of what the ultimate psychological purpose of that is to just continue to program people to respond to triggers. So
Yeah.
that if they, but I don't know like what they would use that for necessarily. Like it seems like they're just intending to drain the people, because Winston said he was quite tired afterward.
Yeah. It's definitely fear mongering among people, trying to show them something. You should be afraid of him. You should hate him. So that you look to Big Brother for your safety afterwards. And so, you see everyone expressing such hatred towards Goldstein. And then at the end, they're like chanting B for Big Brother.
Yeah.
And so it turns from extreme hatred for this one person into extreme love and admiration for someone else.
So that's why they would use the images of Goldstein is to try and amplify the positive emotion toward Big Brother.
Yeah. Big Brother is taking care of this person that you're terrified of. He is your savior, essentially.
I hate it.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty stressful. Like if you had to go through that kind of experience where everyone there was like getting like ravenous,
Like visceral reactions,
Yeah.
throwing chairs.
literally just like foaming at the mouth,
Yeah.
just going crazy, and you have to mimic that too. Like you can't. And also Winston in the description says that he couldn't even help it.
Yeah.
But even if he could, even if he didn't have that visceral reaction to the images and the sounds, then he would still have to act it out.
Yeah.
And even like if you act things out, you end up feeling that way anyways.
Yeah.
And so that I just can't imagine having to go through.
And
all
you're
of
like
that.
at work
Yeah.
when you're doing that.
And one of the main messages that seems to be put through in this book is mentioned at the very end of this chapter, of the subchapter 1, which is whenever Winston goes and gets the journal and the pen, he can't even he doesn't even know what to write.
Yeah.
Like it seems like he's not even sure really what he's opposing. Like he knows that he doesn't like Big Brother in some very vague way.
Yeah.
And that things are really wrong, and that maybe the world shouldn't be this way, because he's an older guy, so he can kind of remember. I think he's middle-aged.
Whenever he was a little kid, that was when they had the first purge, where they were first going through everyone and, kind of getting rid of, traitors and stuff like that. And so he doesn't remember a time before there was war, I think.
But he can remember a time before the establishment
Before
came in.
Big Brother and before the party. Because the party is relatively new, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I remember in later chapters it discusses that he has to look back to see what the world was like before the revolution.
Yeah.
Because he reads through a children's novel, and it describes the capitalists of wearing, your typical
Top hat.
top hat,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So
coattails.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if he was alive before that. Like I said, Orwell's very literal in this. So he talks about the purges. He's talking about the purges following Lenin's death, which would have put him a young man around 29, and I think the book takes place in 50. So you're looking at about probably 20 years. So he's probably 30, maybe in his 30s. But I think it does paint him as sickly, but I think it's just the world he lives in that has him sick.
Yeah, I mean,
30,
it's like draining to live here, and
What
you have
is
to
it that
drink
they
the
have to-
victory
Victory
gin.
gin.
That sounds so gross. It sounds like they're drinking gasoline.
It says that it's like acidic and it's
Yeah.
like will burn
Burns,
you.
yeah.
And it does sound like they're having to literally just do shots of gasoline. Like it sounds terrible, and it's oily. It's really oily.
Yeah.
He says, it's gross.
Yeah.
So, but he can't think of what even to say in this journal.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of like the beginning, the foreshadowing of the message that Orwell tries to put through, which is that the control of language is the control of thoughts. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the first example of Winston being unable to express his thoughts because he doesn't really have any to speak of.
No.
So
Yeah.
what is he going to write down? Really nothing. There seems to be like something bubbling in his unconscious, this conflict. Something's wrong,
Yeah.
and he doesn't know really what it is. And the only thing that he can say is "Big Brother is bad." Like down with
Yeah.
Big Brother. That's all that he can think of. So I'll read this much smaller summary for subchapter 2. Yeah, and hopefully, all of them are pretty much a lot smaller. So subchapter 2. The knock at the door turned out to be some. Oh, by the way, entering into this, like subchapter 2, like the end of subchapter 1 is so terrifying. Like you think
Oh
that
my
that
God, yeah.
the thought police are already on him, and that he's gonna get arrested for even writing in this journal. And he literally just jotted down with Big Brother, so things are really high stakes. The knock at the door turned out to be some old lady asking him to come over to her place to help with a clogged sink. His diary had been left open on the desk, but he left it to lay there for urgency's sake, which is not a very good decision on his part.
No, like close it.
Winston encounters 2 children that jump out at him dressed as spies. The boy and girl pretend to shoot him both with a plastic play gun and a splinter of wood. Their mother dragged them both into a room and shut the door. She appeared to be genuinely terrified of them. Winston explains that any parent in their 30s or 40s was right to be afraid of those little monsters, given their purpose in the dictatorship. Papers would be published with front-page titles mentioning some child hero of sorts that had overheard some conversation that broke the unwritten laws, and as such counted as thought crime. The children were nothing but spies that would turn their own parents in to be slaughtered. When he returned to his journal, he wrote a more coherent entry, almost poetic, about the current status of such times. In finishing his entry, he decides to put in a drawer with a fine powder placed discreetly on a portion of the corner of the book. This powder was intended to reveal any kind of disturbance or use by someone other than himself. And that's the end of subchapter 2.
How many of those news articles that say like the kids are like turning in their parents do you think are real?
I don't know. Almost.
Because it's like these war heroes aren't ever real in the later subchapters. And so like how many of these kids are actually like turning in their parents?
Well, I don't know. Like within the context of the book and the story that Orwell's building up, I guess it would make sense that all of those reports are real, but none of the crimes that they're accused of are.
Well, yeah.
Genuine.
I mean, it seems like no crime is really real.
Yeah, but they seem to be fabricating everything, so it would make sense that they would fabricate these reports as well.
That's what I think it might be, to like encourage kids to turn in their parent, and they're like, oh, it's a hero kid that did this. But what if they also kill the kid because they seem
Right.
too gung-ho about it, because they also kill party members
Right.
that seem too into it.
Well, in a further chapter, there's a man that Winston encounters in conversation, I think, in one of the eating halls, the mess halls.
His friend,
Yeah.
that is the specialist in newspeak.
I don't know. No, not him. He's not really even a friend, but he ends up talking to him at one of the tables, and he mentions that his children had turned in some old guy.
Oh, that's Mr. Parsons.
Yeah.
That's this lady's husband.
Yeah, so Mr. Parsons tells him that his children did make a report.
That makes sense.
And so
His
that's
kids
like
suck.
Yeah, so that's an example of a character actually like having no reason to lie, or, you know, some kind of false publication.
That's
the
true.
Ministry of Truth putting out some false report that these kids actually did go like track someone down walking through one of the more wilderness areas of the city and getting reported. So they may be real, they may not be real, I don't know. But the kids are pretty terrifying though.
Yeah.
Right.
One even like shoots him with something
Yeah.
when he's there. And
So-
I don't remember what he says, but it's like death to thought criminals or something crazy.
Yeah. It's like not a very good picture to think about, like if you were in that position, and that the kids, you know, they're being indoctrinated so heavily with the teachings that they receive at whatever institution they attend every day, I'm assuming. And like, say as the mother, she seemed to be an older lady, which means that she may remember at least the time before the establishment of Big Brother, if not before the war. And she's just trapped, you know. Like Winston is one thing, like he's just alone, and that comes with its own trials. But all he has to worry about is the telescreen.
Yeah.
And then maybe other people happening to come and knock, but he can hide his things before all that happens.
Yeah.
With the mother, it's like the kids are there like every day, like every moment, you know. And so, and they're a whole lot more effective and maybe more unreliable than the telescreen.
Yeah.
So there's just no escaping their monitoring.
And especially because the government wants that to happen.
Yeah.
They encourage it.
So, okay, that was a good chapter. We'll go into chapter 3 then. Subchapter 3, Winston Smith goes into a dream state, attempting to recall his childhood and any kind of solid memory of past event. His mother, father, and sister had died in order to save his life. He dreams of a beautiful woman who takes her clothes off, casts them aside, and in that gesture he presumes she could disband Big Brother and the party with only doing that. He thinks nothing of her physical body, but of that gesture. Oh, is that the right one? So yeah, that's the right one. I was worried. I was like, this seems like it's further along in the story. He recalls his father carrying him down a long stair that at some point requires his father to rest for his spent legs. Winston's mother seems to be carrying his sister in her arms. Or is it a rolled-up blanket? Winston isn't sure if his sister had been born at that point yet. They are evading a nuclear bomb. He recalls the names of Britain and England before they were named First Airstrip. He wakes up to the telescreen, prompting him to get up for the jerk, which was a series of aerobic exercises led by a woman in a tunic and gym shoes. He can't find any solid evidence of the old times or of old speak. Only once had he held actual evidence that could contradict and disprove the current given historical facts. He is then interrupted by the instructress, prompting him to touch his toes without bending his knees. He does so for the first time in several years. All this with a neutral face, for fear of being found out. No negative expression can be afforded. There you go.
Man, that sounds terrible to do this like exercise class
Yeah, dude,
In
I can
front of
barely
the
touch my
telescreen.
toes. I'd get...
without bending your knees.
Oh,
Yeah,
no,
like
I
I
have
would
to,
have
like-
to really heave.
I'd like hyperextend my knees to get farther down. I feel like that's not good for the tendons.
Yeah. And imagine some lady like calling you out on like to everyone.
Yeah, it'd be terrible. And also like having to do these aerobics on top of like having nothing to drink but Victory Gin.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like permanently
Being
half
extremely
drunk people.
malnourished
Yeah.
too.
That's awful.
Oh yeah.
Have,
Drunk people, yeah.
they really are. I guess it's the best way to keep them if you want them to do everything you want them
I
to
mean,
do.
permanently like intoxicated, like a little bit. I mean, wouldn't you want like your army of drones to all be inebriated.
I think that was like the whole point of. I don't think they executed the premise very well, but it was kind of the point of Drunk History. If you've seen that show,
I have.
Like kind of the joke was, well, we don't really need a skit or like a show parodying like history with drunk characters because all of them were drunk. Because there was in a lot of times in a lot of areas in most of history, it was more difficult to get a hold of like clean water to drink than it would have been to find some fermented alcohol that was much safer to drink. And so, you really were just like having weak wine because that was safer than some kind of water because you knew that it didn't have like dangerous bacteria in it. So yeah, maybe it's not super far-fetched that everybody's living off of Victory Gin. I wonder what the hydration factor is for certain alcohols. Like, because it's a diuretic, right? So it dehydrates you.
Yeah.
But can you hydrate at all with alcohol?
It depends on how like what's it called? Diluted it is. But from the way that they talk about the taste of this, doesn't sound very diluted.
It sounds pretty potent.
Yeah. This is
like
100%.
80% ethanol.
Yeah.
Nothing else.
Yeah. Do they get water? I don't feel like they ever talk about having hydration other than like this gin.
I don't think so. But Winston's memory's getting jogged. So now he's beginning to remember things, which, like, I personally don't know, like, what to think about that. Like, because practically, we know that our memories are, like, very unreliable.
Yeah.
So, like, we can implant false memories just if we wanted to. Like, there's an experiment that they did where they brought people in and asked them about the time they went to Disneyland. And they were like, oh... And in like all the questions, and it was just like in between questions, so it wasn't even an official one, which is kind of like ethically gray to do that. But like in between, the examiner personally asked them like, "Hey, did you go on vacation lately?" And they knew because of the way that they screened all of the subjects that they had gone to Disneyland, so that this question would be answered with a yes. And so he's like, "Oh, did you go to vacation recently?" And they were like, "Oh yeah, Disneyland." He's like, "Oh," and then they say, "Did you hug Daffy Duck?" And they were like, "No, we didn't hug Daffy. Is Daffy Duck in Disney?"
Daffy is Looney Tunes.
Right. Okay. So, is Looney Tunes is not Disney.
You're thinking Donald.
Huh?
Donald Duck.
Donald Duck is Disney.
Yes.
Okay, so they
Looney
said
Tunes
Daffy Duck.
isn't Disney?
So
what
they asked
is
about
it?
Daffy
Warner
Duck,
Brothers.
right?
Oh yeah.
Because he's not in Disney, and they said no because it's not a freaking Disney character.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, but just that question, like 3 months later, they brought them back in for the same examinations, which they didn't even care about, I don't think.
Yeah.
And then they again asked them the same question, and they said, "Oh, hey, have you gone on vacation in the last couple of years?" And they say, "Yeah, I went to Disneyland." They're like, "Oh yeah, I remember you telling me about the time that you went and hugged Daffy Duck." And they're like, "Yeah, that was a great time. I love Daffy Duck." And so, and that was consistent across all the subjects. So it was replicable, where they were able to implant this false memory that couldn't possibly have ever existed.
Yeah.
Right.
Because there's no Daffy Duck in Disney. I personally like Daffy Duck. I think they should adopt him. But
Just him, none
Anyway,
of the other
none of the
tunes.
all that to say
They
that
suck.
I don't think that that Winston's memories may be reliable.
Well, I think it talks about, I don't know if it does it in this section, but I know they talk about memories are not concrete right now because they're not allowed to like actually think about their past or think about anything like independent. And so obviously your memories are going to be even worse, and that's what the government is literally taking advantage of by 1 minute saying we're at war with Eurasia and then the next minute saying they're at war with the other one.
The other
What's
country.
the other one?
I don't remember what the other one
It's
was.
Eurasia and E.
something.
Is it?
But yeah,
E
so
something?
they're making use of that.
Yeah. Man, my memory is
Yeah,
hazy
obviously
right now.
our memories are bad too. Do you think that Winston's memory is reliable, Ryan?
I mean, he's drunk half the time. Who knows how long he's been drinking?
That's a good point.
And there's
True.
most of our memories come from, it's just like memorizing anything. It's repetition process. So just like if you're learning anything, if you tell it to multiple people over and over again, you'll be good at memorizing small details, facts and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So the fact that he's not allowed to write anything down, pictures don't exist, I imagine. So the only thing he has to rely on is his memory. That is not very strong because he doesn't use it very often.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think general ideas usually are easy to remember. They're easier to remember. And so, like, the little details in it may not be, completely correct. Probably aren't.
Yeah,
But
so-
the general ideas he could be remembering running from something with his family, but all the circumstances surrounding it might not be correct. And I mean, that's the whole thing with like erasing every concrete detail of the past is like super effective in making people just be like, oh yeah, it didn't exist. I can't prove that this happened. So, I mean, it may not have.
Yeah, just ignoring it. And it seems like his memories too are all negative, so it's likely that that maybe his unconscious would try and repress those to begin with. But it's funny that, well, I guess it makes sense that it's only now that Winston is voluntarily attempting to, and maybe he doesn't even know he's doing this, but he's trying to bring out something. Like he's trying to go back and think about what it was before and regain his memories of what his life was like just before all of this happened.
Yeah.
And so now the memories are coming back in whatever accuracy or misshapen form they come in. So at the very least, something bad happened with his family.
Yeah.
And now he's having to touch his toes. Which I'm happy that he's able to do that.
Yeah,
Don't they say
good
that like
for him.
heart attacks are like less likely if you can touch your toes or something like that?
Is it?
No,
I know
don't
like
I have no
stretching
idea.
or something.
That could be totally wrong.
I think stretching or like yoga is supposed to be good for like heart disease. I don't know.
I'm a big fan of yoga.
Yoga's fun.
Yeah, yoga. Everybody should do yoga in the morning. Chapter 4.
This changes to a yoga podcast.
And now we'll be doing Cobra.
Yeah.
Or my personal favorite, Baby, I think.
I like a corpse
Oh, no,
pose.
Child's Pose.
Oh,
Sorry,
yeah.
Child's Pose.
Child's Pose.
Baby. There might be one. I don't know. There's a lot of them.
There is.
Subchapter 4. Winston Smith is employed as a kind of redactor. He adjusts the past claims on any kind of written article and aligns them so as to make Big Brother look the best he can. Any prediction made by Big Brother that didn't turn out exactly as anticipated must now be changed to match up. The predictions are altered to match the happenings and the old copies are burned. The past is brought up to date. He works in a cubicle alongside many other people, most of which he has seen every day but knows not their names. Tillotson works next to him, and he suspects that he might be assigned to the same assignment as himself. It wouldn't be outside of the realm of possibility. The largest assignment for the day would be for Winston to create a front-page statement from Big Brother. He settles on falsifying the existence of a war hero that died on the front lines. His entire life was nothing but perfect as far as the state would be concerned. As a child, he played with nothing but military imitations, and his service as a spy as a young boy was fruitful when he turned his own uncle in for criminal conversation. He marveled at the ability to create a dead man that existed in the past, yet he could not create a man who exists currently in the present. His office of labor dictated in large part what was truth. There we go. So he's working in the Ministry of Truth, right?
Yeah.
And there are 3 different major sectors there. The Ministry of Truth.
There's the Ministry of Peace, right? And then the
Very
Ministry
friendly
of
names.
War.
Oh, yeah. Ministry of Truth, Ministry of Plenty, and Ministry of Love.
Yeah, Ministry of Love is
Oh, yeah.
not where love happens.
So it's truth, peace, love, and plenty.
Yeah.
So he's in the Ministry of Truth, which is ironic because all they do is lie. Ministry
all
of
of them
Peace
are very ironic.
Is a military war division. The Ministry of Love, as you might...
Where the thought police work.
Yeah, the thought police work there. They torture people and interrogate them. Not very loving.
That's where executions happen.
And then the Ministry of Plenty is supposedly the factories, I think.
It's for rationing and manufacturing and stuff like that.
But it's funny because there's just really not much there to be had.
Literally every statistic they put out is a lie on how many boots they're creating. Yeah.
I feel like I think even they got into a point where they started saying that they made so many boots, the number was 200,000 or something like that, and there weren't even enough people to even use those boots. It was impossible.
He says that there's still people, even though the numbers say 200,000 boots were produced, there's still children walking around barefoot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that they've made it so high that they have to go back and amend the other ones to make it lower so that they're not just, saying astronomical numbers. And so eventually, 5 years from now, it could be, we did 200,000 pairs of boots, where 5 years ago we only did 10,000.
Yeah. Ludicrous.
Yeah.
So this is just one of the many ministries that he can work in, and he's currently in the Ministry of Truth.
What's his department called? I know there's the fiction department that girl works in. He works in the...
I don't know. Oh, the departments. So there's the records department.
Records.
The fiction department, teleprograms department, and the pornography section. And that's only for prole consumption.
Yeah.
So
Man, how do you get so unlucky to become a party member? Because being a prole kind of sounds sick. You just get to be a normal person.
Yeah.
The party is definitely harder on its members.
Oh, yeah.
Hold them to a different standard than the rest of the public.
Yeah. Because it was saying, proles get to watch sports. They get to, have normal marriages. They get to, go to whatever shop they want. They're just all dumb.
Champagne and things like
yeah.
that.
They have a way better life.
They get to watch pornography.
Yeah.
They get to have relationships with other people.
Yeah.
I think marriage is okay for them.
Right.
Yeah, they can get divorces.
Yeah. They can just do whatever they want.
Exactly.
Which is so but what's funny is that the party members are the only class of people that are restricted from doing certain things.
Yeah.
Because they're called proles, right?
Yeah.
The general population.
Yeah, so the proles, they can do whatever they want.
Right.
Yeah.
But and then not the party members, but the who are the highest level people?
I guess it would just be the party.
Yeah, it would be the central party itself.
Yeah, so the central party, they get to do whatever they want. And the proles, they get to do whatever they want.
I don't
but then
even
the party
know
members in between.
I don't even know if there's anyone really in the party, though. Because it seems like everyone is at risk of dying off. Who even knows if Big Brother is a real person?
Right. Yeah, I guess we'll get more into that later in the book, I think.
Yeah.
As to what the potential is for the higher ranking individuals and what freedoms they have or don't have. But yeah, so life for Winston is really restricted in comparison to the proles, who are these poor people that live in the squalor and everything. And in all honesty, it seems like it's a better life. than
Yeah.
having to live like
The thought police kind of just hang out among them.
Yeah.
As like, and they only turn in people that are starting to seem smarter than the
Yeah.
other ones or acting more independently. But I mean, otherwise, you're free to think whatever you want.
So he's changing things, deciding what is real and what isn't real. And I guess that kind of this part of this subchapter begs the question, like, what really is truth? Like, is truth just that which the populace believes? Or is there like an objective truth that exists outside of what everyone else believes? And it seems like that's what Winston is like pursuing.
Yeah.
He has a strong, nagging intimation that there is some objective truth in existence and that he wants to find it. And that maybe at one time he held it in his hands.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think.
I mean,
Brooke is speechless. She was like, oh,
I don't even know how to like articulate it.
your mouth got like wider open.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
you were like,
It's like-
slowly opening your mouth. I was like, yes.
I think an
Yeah.
interesting thing with this, especially, is his creation of a false character. So, like the party's perfect man, as this person that passed away in war, but doesn't really exist. I think it's interesting because then it goes into, I mean, during any kind of large conflict, there arises heroes that become legends, almost legends like themselves. You know, we had for World War II, there's people and vice versa. But even we see it now. I mean, as this year, when you have the Russian and Ukraine conflict that's going on right now, you had the Ghost of Kiev, right, which was a person that is said was a pilot for a fighter jet that had taken down 30 Russian planes all by himself and is protecting Kiev on his lonesome. Well, it turns out it's not a real person. It's a folk tale. It's something that these people, these soldiers, are discussing in the barracks and stuff like that. So you kind of see how that even gets created. Of course, Winston is doing it with a with an ulterior motive for the party, but even that happens now. False characters are created.
Yeah.
The Ghost of Kiev. Have you heard of like Sam Hyde?
Mm-mm.
So there's a guy named Sam Hyde. You've heard of him?
I think.
Okay, so-
it sounds familiar.
So he's this underground troll comedian that does like thrice meta comedy.
Right.
And so he goes up and does stand up and things like that. And he purposefully bombs in order to
I
make
know him.
the tertiary viewers laugh. And so he's not interested in the people in the room, and he's
Right.
not interested in the people who are watching the videos. He's interested in the people who will look at the comments and the reactions of both of those groups. And so he goes out there and does like terrible sets. He gets into like racist stuff and like all of the worst possible things you could say. He gets up there and does them in like the cringiest way. But if you look at it from a far enough removed way, it's funny.
Right.
One of the things that he has done is establish himself as the face of a school shooter. And so
Oh my God.
there's a school shooter that apparently was in some state, and the press did a really good job of suppressing any images of his face.
Nice.
And so what Sam Hyde did was attach his face to the public reports of that school shooting. And so now if you look up that particular shooter, Sam Hyde comes up every time. And so it'll be his face in play, even though the name is wrong.
Right.
And so they've now been doing that with entities that don't have faces. And
Right.
so there were, most recently, the Ghost of Kiev.
Yeah.
He did it with the ghost.
He's the
And
ghost.
so on Twitter, they photoshopped
Yeah.
his face onto
A Ukrainian
a
soldier.
Ukrainian pilot's thing and onto his face. And they got official Ukrainian people to post photos on
say,
their
"This is the ghost."
on their public
Oh
social
my
media
God.
things that this was the Ghost of Kiev. and it was just Sam Hyde photoshopped onto it. So yeah, we really do have. It's funny that we do have even
False
today
story
like
heroes.
false stories
Yeah.
being pushed, even though they don't know. Like the fact that these news publishers don't know the truth,
Yeah.
but they push it anyways.
Well, that's something we see even now. There's a really, really
Yeah.
famous little clip on YouTube if you ever want to go view it. It's a news group in a tri-state area doing a report on something, and they say the exact same thing, word for word, across multiple counties. So that tells you, did they write that? Of course they didn't. That
Yeah.
script was handed to them, and the newscasters are doing their jobs reporting it. But it's something that was passed down from somewhere. So even we see that now, that things are just handed to people, and they report on them. You know what I mean? The news necessarily is coming from somewhere, and all news has ulterior motives.
Oh,
See,
yeah.
The question would be like, where did it come from?
Right.
Yeah.
But we can't ask those questions. We'll disappear.
Yeah.
We'll disappear. So
So
that's
we are not asking those questions
No.
because we do not want to
leave us
disappear.
alone.
These are all rhetorical questions.
I
Yeah.
like our state.
So
I love it here. Please don't.
I
hurt
love
me.
Big Brother. So
Big
that's,
Brother is good.
That's what Winston's doing. He's rewriting history with these different redactions
Yeah.
that he makes, making things make sense. And there's an entire massive industry that is making sure that every paper trail that doesn't align with Big Brother's ludicrous standards of reputation and record are all aligned and rectified. And so they literally just burn the documents that existed previously, and they create new ones. Or they change them up, they cut pieces out and paste new ones in
Yeah.
to change dates and things like that. And
It's
and
pretty crazy how easily you can just get rid of someone. Because, I mean, if you just went missing and then everyone is telling you, who are you talking about? Maverick never existed. And every picture of you, every form of proof that you existed is gone. I mean, what proof do I have that you did exist? Even if it's in my memory, if every single person is telling you, no, that didn't happen. They weren't a person. I mean, it's crazy that eventually you will just believe it, even if you have like concrete thoughts about it. No, I remember this person. It's like, oh, do you? And that's crazy. And they can do it so fast in this world too, because I mean, they can just erase everything in an instant. And these people aren't even used to thinking for themselves.
well, that's the rational decision to make, right? Whenever
Yeah.
someone comes to you and says, hey, if you ask about someone, you say, hey, well, but what about so-and-so? They're like, oh, they don't exist.
Yeah.
And then you say, okay. And you take a look around and you're like, oh, there's nothing left
Right.
of them. There is no evidence. The rational conclusion to come to in that situation is that you were wrong.
Yeah.
That some grand mistake was made in your brain, some weird synapse.
Right. Might have thought a dream. Like
Yeah.
a dream.
You had concocted this in your dreams. The irrational decision is to stick to your guns and your gut and say,
Yeah.
no, I remember them. They did exist, and defy the entire world.
Yeah.
You know,
And
the
I
only
mean,
other way
you're
was,
on that victory gin. So.
You're on-
Yeah.
everything
Can't
comes back to the
trust
victory
anything.
gin.
I mean,
Well, yeah, that's a good point, because it really does seem to be destabilizing everything at the foundation that everyone is on victory gin. Like it must make. Does Winston continue to drink throughout the whole show, or does at some point he stop?
he drinks at lunch. He drinks on his break from work. It seems like every second he's taking a shot of this
Right.
gin. And I mean, it's normal to just during lunch take a shot.
Yeah,
That's pretty crazy. Imagine taking a shot at work.
at work, depending on the job. If you worked at like a bar, maybe it would be
Yeah.
reasonable. Bartenders get in trouble
But
for
imagine
that, though.
you and your sober brain go into this world and you read all of their news stories and you're like, wow, this is completely incoherent because a bunch of drunks wrote it. Like, do you think it actually makes any sense? Anything that's written?
They don't care because they're drunk too, so
Yeah.
they can't even read it.
There has to be like a select few people that... No, but like I bet everyone has like a boss of some sort.
Big Brother.
Yeah, but does he exist?
Subchapter 5. Winston takes a meal at the public cafeteria where every surface is greasy and the food is less than low quality. He is served a black bread in watery soup. He sits with a small man named Syme, who is too smart for his own good, but a fervent servant of the party. Syme tells of his work on the final edition of the Newspeak Dictionary and explains its implications. Soon, Syme says, the entire gambit of human experience will be able to be expressed in a single word. The goal of the Newspeak Dictionary is to destroy words and language, compacting it tighter and tighter. Both synonyms and antonyms are rid of. Negative words particularly have been rid of. Bad no longer exists, but instead, ungood. If someone wishes to express different levels of good, then a prefix is attached. Plus good, or even greater, double plus good. Even the spaces in between have been removed, so as to further the consolidated language, even if it is superficial. Doublethink is a bit of an abstract concept, but is basically part of cognitive dissonance. When someone accepts that two or more supported beliefs, or affirmations or statements, contradict one another. So as long it does not conflict, it goes... I actually did not write a coherent sentence here. As long as it doesn't conflict or go against Big Brother.
Were you drunk when you wrote that?
I hope not.
Drinking gin?
This was last summer, so...
This part where he describes a lot of the stuff is pretty confusing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just because it's so abstract from
Yeah.
what the way language is, that it's hard to comprehend this world where language is completely different. So it's extremely hard to, because I couldn't imagine you writing this summary.
Yeah, like I was just like I
Yeah.
jot this down really quickly, and now I'm like having a seizure trying to read it. So someone accepts that two or more supported beliefs or affirmations or statements contradict one another, but that's fine as long as the conflicts do not go against Big Brother and his vision for the world. Old speak is English as we the readers know it. Newspeak is the new language being formed by people like Syme who aim to control thoughts and actions via language so as to create the perfect utopia. Face crime is what happens when someone displays a negative facial expression in response to good news concerning the party or Big Brother. A kind of mannequin man is talking loud enough for everyone to hear, just a table over from him. He is spouting some generic platitude that anyone could memorize and spout off. He is leaning back in his chair, and his glasses are arranged in such a way with the light that they are only white discs, which, by the way, is an anime cliche.
Right.
Nice.
So, like I thought of
That lens flare.
Yeah.
Crossover.
There's also like the character I like in there's a character in One Piece that they interact with, and he has like this way of like fixing his glasses with his hands, and every time that he does it, like turns his glasses into white discs.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I always thought that was really cool. So maybe someone should do, if there is, maybe there is.
A 1984 anime?
Yes, a 1984 anime. Yes. Oh, at least a manga, please. Someone make that.
If it doesn't exist, make it.
I would love it. So a woman is listening to every word he is saying and believing every bit of it. Winston thinks how he seems like a puppet and not a human at all. He sounds like a duck, Winston reflects. Quack, quack. Syme then remarks the same thing, but aloud, saying there is a word for such a talk, which can either be used as a compliment or an abuse. Duck speak. At that observation, that lined up so neatly with Winston's own thoughts, Winston feels that Syme will be vaporized as a result of his intelligence. Despite Syme being so dedicated to the party, he said and saw things too clearly. Only those who quacked like ducks would escape evaporation. A fat man with glasses walks up to their table and tells stories of his children turning in those who were suspected of criminal thoughts. One was likely shot, and another they actually caught ablaze. The fat man was proud of them and bragged of the indoctrination being even better than when he was a child in school. And he uses those words explicitly, I think, indoctrination. Winston realizes that there is a woman sitting at a table near him that was also sitting behind him with seemingly no reason during the 2 minutes hate. They connect gazes for a brief moment. Is she a spy? A thought police even? Either way, she would be a great danger given the fact a moment ago in conversation he was not consciously and totally in control of his own mannerisms and facial responses. Everyone is called back to work. So that's kind of terrifying.
Yeah, to be in control of your facial expressions.
Yeah.
24/7.
Yeah. So this is kind of the part of the story where like kind of some horror starts setting in because the potential for a spy, like we've kind of Orwell's kind of set the stage with the potential for like the children's spies and the telescreen kind of eavesdropping, and that maybe any individual person could be a spy. And now we have like someone who's prime suspect for like actively hunting for Winston.
Yeah.
I thought it would come off like a horror movie, really.
Yeah, this is one of the parts that I was like on the edge of my seat with her, and then maybe 2 subchapters from now, whenever he's in the alley. But yeah, the fact that she was behind him during that, and then now she's by him again, catches a glance when he's not fully in control. And the only other person he's really caught eyes with is O'Brien. Mm-hmm. And he believes O'Brien is on his side. And so now we have someone that he's looked at and he feels is an ally, and then another person that is an enemy, potentially. So pretty interesting.
What did you guys think about Syme?
I think he's obviously portrayed as a party loyalist who fully supports the party and is actually proud to do what he does. I think it's interesting that Orwell says that he basically will be killed because even though he is very loyal, he's too intelligent. I thought that was kind of interesting, just the way they kind of showed this idea. So if you had an idea like, well, maybe if you're just the perfect guy and you just go along with it, you'll be great. No, Orwell shows no, that'll get you killed too.
Yeah,
because Syme would not be rewarded for his potential, but not potential for anything. It's his potential for obedience. Right. How well will he obey? And if he has too much potential in other areas, then that obedience comes into question. Well, he has the potential to become some great obstacle to our cause. Right.
Yeah.
And because of that, we will invest in the front end and evaporate him.
Yeah.
Vaporize him. But then the ducks, the quacking ducks or the duck speakers, they have no potential of becoming greater individuals because their intellect and IQ is so low and they're so simple in their approach and their being that there's no problem. Even if they decided to oppose Big Brother, they could just be vaporized immediately. Right. But Syme is so smart that he could actually be an obstacle if his mind was put to the task to oppose.
Right. Well, it's like, did you ever read the short story Harrison Bergeron in high school?
Possibly.
Did you read that?
Yes.
So in Harrison Bergeron, they want everyone to be completely equal. So if you're too smart, they put something in your brain to, it's like sends electric shocks so that you never think too deeply about things. You're never smarter than someone else. For dancers, they put like weights on them.
Yes, I did read this. I did.
Yeah, so I think it's they don't want to go to too much trouble to keep someone in line. So a smarter person, there's a lot more they have to do to keep them in check, to make sure that they're not thinking too far outside the box, that they're not too progressive in their thoughts. And so it's better to just get rid of people like that and keep people that are more, just at the median. They don't think too deeply about anyone. And so they really use the people that are smarter to further their cause. And as soon as they've worn out what they can do, they're done with them.
Yeah, it seems like the book that you mentioned, or the short story, I think.
Yeah, it's a short story.
Was kind of like using a satire to show how silly it is to try and enforce equity.
Yeah.
Or absolute equity. Whereas Orwell goes in and uses a very practical answer to it, which is that no, if we wanted equity, we wouldn't enforce it through these silly means of weights on your ankles for dancers and microchips with electric shocks to interrupt deep thinkers. No, we would just vaporize you.
Yeah.
Right, use eugenics.
Yeah, exactly. And we would use eugenics and vaporizations, and we would just get rid of you and introduce the proper people into the world that we want.
Yeah.
It would be a much more practical answer to the problem at hand. So I like that. That was a good one.
Good one.
All right, subchapter 5.
Are we on 6?
Subchapter 6.
Yeah.
You don't know how to count.
I don't know how to count when I do English accents poorly.
Just like a real British.
I know. Oh no. I hope the Brits are commenting.
It's fine, guys. I lived in England. I can say that.
Winston Smith writes more in his diary, and this time recalls the fact that he had a wife not too long ago. His memory seems to be greatly distorted and disabled, though the contents not yet destroyed. Their marriage was an assignment, as was every other marriage of their time, which were based purely on ability to spawn children. Marriage assignments were never a result of physical affection. In fact, if two people were attracted to one another, they were marked to never be paired for marriage. The party successfully trained everyone in the way of abstinence so that they didn't even want to have sex with one another. Sex was an unseemly and necessary discomfort for these people now. Winston's wife, for example, treated sex as a weekly commitment rather than any kind of opportunity for enjoyment between man and wife. She would say either, "Let's try to make a baby," or "Let's do our duty to Big Brother." They never conceived a child, and as a result separated. Divorce is not permitted for party members. Winston, in writing about his wife and their failure, he has some kind of vision of a woman with a painted face that attracts him. So we mentioned a little bit earlier about how paroles can have divorce. Likely, the party can have divorces. But the party members themselves can't divorce him, so he has this wretched woman that he tells us about. But what do you guys think about that?
I think it's just an extension of this party's desire to have its people have no positive interactions outside of its praise for Big Brother. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? They want them to solely focus, if any good thoughts at all in their life come from the Central Committee. They don't want them to have, intercourse with each other because that's a pleasure that's not involving Big Brother. That pleasure that is involving Big Brother, when they're allowed to do it, is for him to produce offspring. So it's just another example of the control that the party has on the members.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think also, too, that it seems like you would, if you wanted total control over the population, that you would want to prevent them from obtaining things of value in their life that were worth dying for. And so, say you have a wife or a husband, they would become so important to you that you would be able to just, forsake anything for them. And that would be a very big problem for Big Brother because they seem to just evaporate whoever they see fit. And so, for instance, if they went missing, that would cause quite a problem
Yeah.
in that individual's life. And then that would result in them being evaporated. And that's not practical because we still need people to reproduce. And so if we end up, causing this huge disruption in everybody's personal lives by evaporating people they actually care about, we probably shouldn't have that. We should just have them not care about each other, and then we still get the children, and we have no problem if we evaporate one of them.
Yeah, they definitely don't want anyone to be important in your life. I mean, even Winston's best friend, Syme, he even talks about how they hate each other.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that they're encouraging any positive interactions between anyone. And so they probably, if they see you have too good of a relationship with someone, so like if him and Syme did seem like they actually liked each other, I'm sure that they would move them or kill one of them.
Yeah, what a shame.
And it would probably be Winston, because Syme is doing stuff right now.
So that's one thing about this book that comes to mind, that why I'm glad I probably won't read this book again. Like, after having read this for a second time, I feel like I'm pretty good on it. Like, I'm probably done forever for the rest of my life. Because it's so, in addition to its prose being so bland, which may or may not be necessary to the overall tone and theme of the book, it's just so, there's no hope in this book.
It's so bleak.
Yeah, like it's just so difficult to get through. Like if you really put yourself in the shoes of Winston and these other characters, you just really want to bite a bullet. Right. Like there's not like you already feel like if you really put your imagination to it, you would rather snuff it than go on. Like if you had any ounce of like your knowledge of this life that we have today, in 2022 in America and Texas, we would, and then just zap ourselves into Winston's shoes. We'd just opt out.
Yeah.
See, but one thing that's really interesting, especially what you were talking about, Brooke, of the of him wanting to separate and have no connections or anything like that. What's really unique is that it's only for party members. Proles go. I mean, granted, this Oceania, is that what their country is called? Is constantly at war. I imagine most of the production is going to war efforts, if there is a war going on, actually. Like you said, most of the stuff we don't know. It's unreliable of actually what's going on in this world. What is the truth? But the what was I going to say?
Interesting about the relationships.
Right, the relationships. So, but the proles get pretty much, they're living out their life normally in this dystopian world, but it's normal. They're not being spied on constantly. They get to live their life freely. There's really no restrictions to them, which I think goes back into, of course, 1984 is Orwell wrote the book as a slight to the Soviet Union. So I think it's interesting that those are the ones that are published. Soviet party members. Well, this, they're part of Ingsoc, but those are the people that's published. So with Orwell and his disdain for the Soviets for what happened to him in his early years, I think it's funny. It's like the world sucks only if you're a Soviet or in the party. Everyone else, their life is going just okay. Still sucks because, this dystopian world, but these are the people that get treated the worst.
That is odd because, because Orwell's a socialist, right?
In his later years, around this time, not really. Orwell's socialism, and if you really want to know kind of what kind of socialist Orwell is, read his book called Homage to Catalonia, which is about his time fighting for the leftists in Spain. He's very, I guess what I would call him now would be because Trotskyism is kind of not even around, would be an anarchist. So he believes in having the revolution, but then completely abolishing the state and no authoritarian measures at all. So absolutely nothing, which is kind of what Catalonia did, but they immediately got invaded because without a state, you can't have a military.
Right.
Yeah.
So
So
it's just prime for the picking at that point. for the
right,
other
right. So a
country.
lot of Marxist-Leninisms, which is kind of what Lenin and Stalin and them followed, they completely bashed Trotsky. Sorry, not Trotsky. Orwell. They called it utopian. Utopian socialism, what it was called at that time.
It's just the insult that everyone applies to
Right.
everyone.
You know, so
Yeah.
they were just saying that he's utopian, he's a child. So he just really, really hated what we would call now Marxist-Leninism, but at that time would be the Soviets. So around this time, though, no. This would be, and then towards the end of this, I'll talk a little bit more, kind of my general overall view of it. But we can see around this time, Orwell would not be anywhere close to what you would call a socialist. Maybe you might call him what we'd call now like a liberal, but he was still leaning more towards conservative views around this time.
I was trying to get like a hold of maybe like what would have been Orwell's general position on like the workmen, right? And that would be the proletariat.
Right.
And so you could say that the proles are kind of like, I can't decide like if the proles are the proletariat
Yes,
or the party
yes.
Yeah.
members are also proletariat.
He Orwell is counting the proles as the proletariat, the working class. So the Soviet Union believed in what was called
That makes a whole lot of
Would
sense.
that
They
be
call
where
it
they got proles
I
from,
just
too?
realized that
Yes.
proles is proletariat.
yes, INGSOC, English Socialist Party.
Yep.
But the Soviet
What
Union
could
believed in
prole
something
mean?
that was distinctly unique to Leninism. And if you want to read about this, it's in the book called What Is to Be Done, which Lenin wrote what we're going to do. So he believed in an idea called the Vanguard Party, which means that there is a group of individuals that are going to be more politically inclined to lead, kind of like we would call like a republic, like how we have individuals. You know, you go about your day-to-day life, you're not worried about politics. We elect people. Lenin had kind of the same idea, and he called it the Vanguard Party. This would be the proletariat, but they would basically be the people that are going to be in charge of running the government. Orwell hated that idea. He felt like it would create an elitist attitude. But basically, the Vanguard Party would be the government. So in 1984, you can see it. You got the proles, which are your proletariats, and then the party, which is like a different class of people that he felt. He felt the Vanguard Party would create another class of people. So that's why even in the book, it says that the party members hate the proles.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
they see them as less than. So that kind of gives you a little bit of insight to where he was coming from. when he
See,
was
so that's
writing
all
this.
interesting to me because it seems like Winston. It's interesting that Winston, and this is later in the book, but I'll mention it now because our conversation's gone that way. Winston puts the hope in the proles.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So his character seems to believe that if there is any hope, that it would be that hope would rest in the proles. But Big Brother doesn't seem to have the same opinion. Big Brother seems to think that the proles are the most controllable. They are the they're so insignificant in the grand scheme of things. They can do as they please.
Right.
So Big Brother seems to have the opinion that the party members are the biggest threat because those are the ones that are policed and manipulated to the greatest degree. So that's interesting. Like, what do you think is actually the case? Who do you think really is the most dangerous, the proles or the party members?
I think just in like their numbers, the proles are the most dangerous, that they far outnumber everyone else.
So they're still populace.
Yeah.
They're still the majority.
But the fact that their lives haven't been changed or oppressed as much. I mean, if you're living just like not as well as other people, but you still have all these freedoms, it doesn't seem like there's a need or a want even to overthrow the government or help the party members, because the party members, you know, see them as less than, and they're able to do a lot of things that the party members aren't allowed to do. And so what would even be their desire to overthrow this government that's not necessarily oppressing them as much as it is other groups? And so I don't really think that they feel the need to rise up or anything. And so I think that the party and Big Brother saw that, and that's why in their sheer numbers they are given the freedoms that they are, maybe because why would they seek to change anything when it could get worse if they change things?
Right. And
so
I don't think they don't even have a vision.
Yeah,
Like, they don't, and there's a really good example in another chapter of just exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
We'll have to wait for that because Winston interacts with a pearl at some point.
Yeah.
And that's a really good example. So we'll keep going. We have 2 more subchapters left for this conversation.
Yes.
Winston puts into question all the history, scare quotes, that is given and whether creatures such as capitalists or certain unbelievable laws ever existed at all. He recalls having held a piece of actual historical evidence back in 1973 that proved the lies of the party. 3 men had conspired with Eurasia, so that was the other.
We
No.
knew Eurasia.
We knew it's the other one.
What's the other one?
Darn. And given them valuable secrets of the Big Brother and caused a good bit of trouble for the party. They admitted, scare quotes, to their crimes 2 times and were arrested twice. Once they were forgiven and reinstalled to free life, and the second, they were killed. The paper he held proved that their confessions were lies and the dates were impossible. If there were any hope, it lay in the paroles. They were somewhat left alone by the thought police for their lack of education and intellect. The saying went, animals and paroles are free. They worked the most grueling jobs and didn't even have a telescreen in their home. They had the freedom and privacy to conspire and rise up, if they so please. So that's chapter 7. Did you find it?
I know the part I'm looking for. Okay, there's East Asia and there's Eurasia.
Okay, so East Asia and Eurasia.
Man, I found the exact part I was looking for because
Very
I knew
good.
there was a part that mentions both of them.
We're proud of you, Brooke.
Thank you.
So yeah, that actually was a little bit of what we already talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
So then we'll just go ahead and go to the next chapter.
Yeah.
The next subchapter.
We're ahead of
Pretty much hit
it.
on the dynamic between proles and party members.
Yeah.
So that's great that we just happened to go right into that.
Nice.
We just gave a summary to the conversation.
Yeah.
Chapter 8. Winston makes his way to the part of the city that all the proles live. He mentions how having any free time at all was suspect at the least and a crime at the most. They referred to having any individual life as own life. People were expected to be alone really only during sleep, and every other moment would be spent doing some work or communal project contributing to Big Brother and the party. Winston walks by plenty of proles and overhears several of them arguing about the lottery. The lottery, according to Winston, was the sole reason for many of the proles' continued decision to live. They were completely uneducated and yet had some unfathomable capability to compute numbers, statistics, and exercise feats of numerical memory that seemed impossible. The lottery itself, of course, like most other things in this utopia, was fake. The grand prizes were given to people who don't exist, and the lower prizes were seldom paid out to those who won them. Winston comes across a pub and sees an old-timer with a white mustache walk in. He impulsively decides to go in, buy him a drink, and ask him about the old days before the revolution. To Winston's surprise and disappointment, the old man can give the most precise details, but nothing of any import. Winston will ask if life then was better than life now, but the old man seems incapable of making the comparison and instead latches on to some word mentioned in the sentence that reminds him of some other thing from the past. Winston realizes then how the past is really being rewritten and lost. He leaves when the old man begins to be affected by his liter of beer. Upon entering the street again, he finds that no one is around. A prole comes running out of a building and warns him to get down. A steamer, the name given to rocket bombs, is coming. The proles seem to have an uncanny ability to sense when steamers were coming, despite the fact that they traveled faster than the speed of sound. Winston got down on his knees and covered his head. The rocket bomb hit a house just a block away or so from him. As he walks to see the damage, he sees a huge red streak and a bloodless arm and hand laying in the rubble. Everyone went back to their business as usual, as if nothing had happened. Winston then gets lost in thought, and his feet bring him back to the antique store where he had got the book from, the journal. He was terrified at the potential danger, but put himself in by coming back to this location, but felt it less suspicious to go in than to stand on the pavement outside. He hears from the store owner how there are little antiques left for him to sell, and most of the metals have all been melted down. The store owner remembers him as the man who bought the book from him. Winston is attracted to a table with many little trinkets such as lockets and such. He finds a deep blue glass hemisphere with pink coral trapped inside. He is captivated by its beauty and its apparent uselessness. He buys it for $4, which makes the store owner very happy. He likely would have taken $3 or $2. Winston goes into the back room of the store and finds a room arranged as if to be lived in. The store owner tells how this was where he lived with his wife until she died, and how he has been selling the pieces off one by one. Winston suddenly feels like he knows what it feels like to prop your feet up by the fire with the kettle in the burner. How wonderful it would be to rent this room out for a small fee every month. He puts that idea out of his head at once. Winston finds a large painting he wishes he could take home, but can't for its large size. He leaves the store and encounters the girl with dark hair that has been following him. He is paralyzed with fear. Now he knows without a doubt that she has been following him. She likely saw him enter the pub as well. He wants nothing more than to go home and be still. He has the desire to turn and track her down and bludgeon her to death with a rock, but resists the urge. He goes home.
Pretty crazy.
So that is the end of chapter 1,
Right.
or book 1. And is really a great setup for the rest of the book. So what do you guys think about that one? It was kind of a long summary, sorry.
Well, you can continue the conversation about the proles because it's the old man you were gonna talk about.
Yeah. Well, okay, what were we talking about? So right. So that's kind of what he goes and he talks to one of the old proles, and he has no memory of what he has. All the memories, but they're all like disjointed, and he doesn't have like the ability to think and establish his values so that those memories can be made sense of in an important way. They're just, various little fragments that are pretty much useless to Winston. He doesn't care about them.
I feel like life couldn't have been too different for him that, I mean, he would remember some aspects or something, or maybe whenever he's asked, was life better? But, I mean, if it's so subtle, the difference, and I mean, the thought police don't even really do anything. The only real difference is they don't have, like, access to education or anything.
Yeah.
But, I mean, how are you really going to notice how much different it is if the changes are subtle? Like in Animal Farm, all the changes over time are subtle, and so no one objects. And so for the proles, it was probably a really subtle change where it just feels like, why even rise up at this point?
Right.
Yeah, there's a song by Alabama called "Song of the South," and there's a line in there. There's some lyrics that say, "Well, somebody told us Wall Street fell, but we were so poor that we couldn't tell." And so maybe that's why the proles, they don't really care, because everything's always been the same for them. Like whether it was war or not, their quality of life was already so low that no matter what happens with the government and everything like that, it's just pretty much static living for them.
That's a good comparison.
Yeah, there was another country song that I thought of too, but I didn't pull it up. So yeah, it's a shame that there is that static living, because it gives Winston nothing to go off of.
Yeah.
The only thing that may have been of very small value was that the prole did seem to confirm that the capitalists existed.
Yeah.
Because he remembers having to tip his hat to the capitalists and to the ladies.
Yeah.
The lords and ladies, I guess. And so that's not a thing anymore, and they're gone. And it's also funny that they always refer to them as creatures.
Yeah.
The capitalists. Those creatures.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then he finds his way into the
The same shop.
the same shop, and finds that useless piece of glass.
Yeah, it's just a paperweight
Yeah.
with some coral.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it's like, because it's useless, he loves it.
Yeah. And I mean, they don't get any like special items.
Yeah, they can't have like personal like belongings. It
Yeah.
doesn't seem like,
Yeah.
because that would be
So,
like too self-centered.
Right.
Yeah. Own life.
Yeah, own life. That's all they say. Can you imagine it, like, if you look through, and also I really want to do this when we get done with the third book, like inside of the third
Do
chapter.
an entire podcast just in newspeak.
Oh my gosh, that would actually be terrible.
Yeah.
But think it, like, we should go through the lexicon. I think, is it a lexicon or the? Because it's in the back of the book.
Yeah.
It's the newspeak.
It's like a dictionary.
Yeah, the appendix.
Yeah.
So the appendix is an important part of the book, but we should
Principles of newspeak.
go through the appendix and look at some of the newspeak words. If you thought about it, like, I think that those little birds in Nemo,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
what are they? They're like,
The pelicans?
yeah,
Seagulls?
the seagulls. Yeah, they go meep meep.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Pelicans
Yeah.
are different.
I feel like that's how newspeak people would sound a little bit, like just repeating. My.
Yeah.
Own life. They just
Yeah.
repeat it over some, weird phrase over and over again.
I mean, like they've condensed their speech so much that just one word can mean like so many different things.
yeah, and Syme says eventually they're going to get down to one,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
which begs the question why, like, at some point they don't even need words.
Can just do sign language.
Yeah. Here's a good parallel theory that eventually, like, say this 1984 world goes on, then we end up in H.G. Wells's time machine. And that's what happened.
That's canon.
That's exactly what the party members became, the underground creatures.
Yeah. What were they called again?
And let me see, H.G. Wells. Oh shoot.
Not even typing.
Yeah. They are, I feel like the oologs or something like that.
That sounds like something.
No, I don't know what they're. Oh my gosh. Here's pictures of them.
Is that from the movie?
Yeah.
So gross. They did not have that hair.
Oh, the Morlocks.
Morlocks. That's what it is.
The Morlocks. So these are what the party members became.
Morlocks.
They don't need language.
No.
They just work.
They just do and grunt.
Yeah. So Winston is now in a horror fiction.
Yeah.
He's being watched. This is the third time that we've seen this brown-haired girl, and now he's contemplating murdering her.
Yeah.
And also, okay, so here's a
Brutally.
point that we can maybe go out on. I was talking with one of my coworkers, and she does not like 1984 whatsoever.
Why?
Well, totally reasonable. She can have whatever opinion she
Yeah.
wants. Like, it's a bland. She says it's a bland book,
Oh, okay.
and the necessities of the language are completely lost on her. I think, but she hates it because she says that it's a sexist book. That Winston is sexist and like a misogynistic rapist.
I'm sure that they are promoting sexism in this world, though.
I mean, I don't know that is necessarily true, but her point about it was that Winston had these fantasies about having sex with this woman,
Yeah.
and that was like a very misogynistic thing to include in the book. My counter to that is that these people are so warped and depraved and stuff like that.
Yeah,
that,
they're not normal people.
Like, they're literally so repressed in every way that having fantasies about like raping a woman seem like the most mild of like the potential
Or murdering
psychological
her, yeah.
events. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so I don't think that would be a symptom of illness for Winston
Yeah.
as a result of his forced living circumstances. not a character trait that's being proscribed by the author.
Yeah.
Something that's being approved of, like that would be like a problem, like a symptom of the overall situation.
I don't think it reads sexist to me.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you guys because that may have been, maybe I'm sexist and I missed it. And it's like, well, because she was like, of course you wouldn't notice. Maybe you're sexist, and I was like, oh, okay.
I mean, the undertones of the book have that implication in there.
Yeah.
I mean, it was also written in the 50s, and George Orwell grew up in the 30s and 40s, so it was written during a very sexist time.
Yeah.
But
just reading it later, though, in the book, I don't think it's...
Yeah. My point is that if it was just a result of the time and a different apprehension of like male-female relationships and what was okay and what wasn't okay, that would count to me as like narrative shoe leather.
Yeah.
Like unnecessary detail that contributed nothing in the way of the story. If it was just something that was a product of Orwell's time.
Well, I think he also... Winston even talks about why he feels this way towards women, especially pretty women, is because they are usually spies and they always are in that group that's the pro-abstinence, or not abstinence, but...
Yeah, the anti-sex league.
Yeah, the anti-sex club. And so, I mean... He's talking about his frustrations with that, and he always doesn't like these girls because they're very, like, about the party.
Yeah.
And so I think it's more of a projected hatred of the party on this girl. And so it doesn't matter that necessarily she is a woman, but it's because of what women represent within the party.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good example or explanation for that.
But Orwell could be sexist. I mean, yeah.
I wouldn't put it past him. I wouldn't say we can't confirm nor deny.
Yeah, we can't talk to him and ask him.
Yeah, what a shame. If we could, we'd just call him up right now.
Call him, hey bro, you sexist?
So the rocket bomb, that was pretty crazy. We kind of jumped
Yeah.
ahead a little bit, but like the rocket bomb, I thought it was really funny whenever he came up to that hand, the severed hand, and just like kicked it into the gutter.
Yeah.
Like he kicked it into one of the
Yeah.
the drainage slots.
I like that everyone just goes about their day afterwards. They're
Yeah.
like, oh.
Of all the things that Winston could have done, he just kicked that hand. I was like, that's hilarious. I thought that was a really funny
I mean,
part.
it's kind of like a disregard for not human life, but I mean, like, it doesn't really matter, right? Oh, just another decapitated hand kick.
Right.
Doesn't matter. It happens all the time. And so it's like a he's desensitized to violence, death, gore, stuff like that. So doesn't even matter.
What do you think, Ryan, is going to happen with this
think?
brown-haired girl?
Have
you read ahead?
No.
Okay.
I stopped right there.
Ooh.
I mean, she is definitely leading. It's kind of one of those things we were trying to figure out if it's a red herring or not, or if she is a spy. But the fact that he chooses not to do anything, it could go either way. And she could not be a spy, and he could just be paranoid. It seems like he got paranoid once he started not toting the party line with his book. So it could just be another example of his paranoia when it comes to it. Or she could be. And then, of course, got a whole escapade with seeing what happens when someone actually does break line and what happens to him.
What's your hypothesis with O'Brien?
Yeah, we got to talk more about O'Brien because I feel like we really...
I want to know someone's thoughts. Because
we
never read it.
We really like scraped over him.
We did.
So Ryan, tell us about O'Brien, like what you think about him.
I think... Well, one thing that Winston talks about is that of always being in control of your facial expressions. So it seems like he knows kind of everyone's normal blank face, I guess you would say. So the fact that he felt something that they both were thinking on the same wavelength gives me an impression that he's kind of feeling the same way. But I think what's going to happen is they're going to use him as an example to show what happens to somebody. Because Winston, right now, they just know that people disappear or get, what do they call it?
Vaporized.
So I think they're going to use O'Brien as a character to kind of show what's going to happen.
What do you think about the dream with O'Brien?
Which one was that one?
It's he has that dream that O'Brien is saying he'll like see him in the end or something.
He'll see him where the light is.
I think it's another projection of Winston's delusions of trying to find a friend.
Yeah.
So he sees someone that makes weird eye contact with them, and now he thinks that they're on the same wavelength, like they have a connection.
Yeah, so I guess you would consider like Winston pretty paranoid by this point.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like we said earlier, like the rational thing is to just not make assumptions that counter everyone in your world.
Right.
That the rational thing is to say that everyone is reasonably on the right track and that the truth lies in the population. But now he's having to make these assumptions that really does. It's like beyond all odds, O'Brien, out of them all, these little glances, they mean something. So he's kind of in that. He's making that jump. He's thinking that he's in a great conspiracy, and you can't blame him that much because he seems to have some other pieces of evidence to support that claim. And if he was paranoid anyways, those kind of little clues would kind of just send him farther off. If the paranoia is kind of like, definitely paranoia is a sickness.
Yeah.
So it's a ball that once it gains momentum is hard to stop.
Right.
Because you just see it everywhere.
Yeah.
So
It'd be scary to rely on just a look with someone to figure out who's on the same side as you.
yeah, we play a board game called Secret Hitler.
Love it.
And in that game, you have to try and lie about your true identity if you are a fascist, and if you're a liberal, you're trying to figure out who your teammates are.
Yeah.
And you have to do it pretty much purely off of like how people sound with their voice and like slight looks.
It's easier when you've played with someone a lot. If we play with Mike, your dad.
Yeah.
If he talks a lot, he's not a fascist. If he stops talking and just sits there and smiles the whole time, he's a fascist.
Yeah.
Every time.
It's hard to tell. Like
Yeah.
even with especially with new people and everything like that.
Yeah, it's really hard to tell.
So Winston, and our lives don't depend on the board game, but
No.
Winston's life depends on it.
Yeah, finding out who's a friend and who's your enemy.
Yeah, just by a few fractional glances.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, awesome. We've pretty much covered the first chapter or the first book. We're 1/3 of the way through. We'll cover books 2 and 3 next, as well as the appendix at the end of book 3, which is important.
We can do 3 in the appendix together.
Yeah, we'll do 3 in the appendix together, and then if we very much feel like it, we can do a movie to book comparison. But that's just a bonus if we feel like it.
Yeah.
So, just as a reminder, there are show notes that you can use, time codes to click on to navigate between subchapters and topics. And yeah, so what do you guys think overall? Is it good or not? Is it worth it, Ryan? Or
There's not actually only one thing that makes this book hard for me to read. I know a lot about George Orwell, like as a person.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that bother me about it, and I keep going back to this one thing. So, as I had mentioned before, Orwell originally was in the leftist movement of Great Britain. As he got older, he started going to these meetings, but he would write down. He had been in contact with basically the what would be our CIA, Britain's version of the CIA, which is essentially a secret police. A lot of these organizations, especially during the Cold War, didn't officially exist. Now we know the CIA exists, but during the 50s, it was a ghost organization. There was no official CIA. So he was going to these meetings and writing down people's names, figuring out how dangerous they were, and working with the organization to turn these people in for suspicious leftist activity. So when I read this book, and he is, this character that's following him around, and he's worried about as a spy, and he's making us basically be in Winston's shoes. George Orwell was that woman. He was the guy going around and turning people into the secret police, and he was that. So it gets difficult because when I'm reading it and I'm like, I see what you're doing, but that was you. Because Orwell, in a lot of his books, he tries to get home a point, right? He doesn't just tell these stories. He has a certain message he's trying to convey. And it's just hard to read because you can't separate, especially a guy who takes fiction stories and they're allegories for nonfiction events, but he was that person. You know what I mean?
So was that pre or
crazy.
post 1984?
This would have been pre.
So there's an opportunity for him to have turned a new leaf, so to speak.
I guess the older Orwell gets, the more conservative he gets. That's
Right.
why
So it's
preface
possible that he would think that maybe turning people in for that would not be a good idea.
Right. And see, that's why, George Orwell, for all his anti-Soviet stuff, actually never visited the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. He never did. He knew nothing he knew a little bit about the Soviet Union, but he did nothing about the integral parts of it or something like that. And he wrote stories about them. I think in reading this book, he has a lot of parallels with the way the secret policing was working in Britain and America at the time, because he worked with them. He was a spy for them against leftist figures. A lot of these leftist figures weren't even necessarily hardcore Soviet positions. Of course, this is during the Red Scare, but you had Paul Robeson, he tried to get arrested, who was a black singer at the time, who had strong leftist views. Eventually in life he did visit the Soviet Union and stuff like that, but he was the guy going around pointing at people for as soon as he left the leftist movement. He was going and being a spy and going to meetings to take notes and get names and faces and turn them over to the authorities to have them arrested.
See, that's like a philosophical problem, right? Because it seems like on both sides of the aisle, both left and right, you find people wanting to make exceptions to the rule, which is that, these ideas and these concepts are so dangerous that I'm willing to break a few of my own ethics to make them go away and to defend against them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of compromise that really does result in the overall compromise of the person's character and ethic, and results in basically the exact same outcome that they're trying to prevent.
Right.
Yeah.
They're trying to prevent the red from spreading, and so they become the red, and they become the very thing that they didn't want to become. McCarthyism is a prime example of that, of people becoming, starting this massive witch hunt during the Red Scare that was basically mimicking a lot of what was happening in the Soviet Union. And so USSR throwing people in gulags was happening the same thing in America during the Red Scare, and especially with some of the Asian internment camps that we had.
Right.
Yeah.
And that for sure, the internment camps that we had here in America are basically identical to what was happening in Gulag. Severities may have had a small discrepancy, but basically, I think it's a good philosophical question. Should you ever sacrifice your ethics? Well, what's a better way to say that? Does the end ever justify the means?
Mm-hmm. See, the only maybe it's not Orwell's intention, but a lot of people see Orwell himself as an anti. The only reason why I bring that up, he's seen as a very anti-authority figure. But of course, he used the authorities whenever he saw fit during certain circumstances. And I just think it's another problem. Of course, 1984, Animal Farm are good books, in my opinion. They're written relatively well, and I can kind of see why they're such classical literature. I think the main problem with me too is because in Orwell's books he has a disdain for propaganda, but all his books in the West are propaganda. You know what I mean? The Animal Farm actually movie was partially funded by the CIA. The one in the 70s, the one that's animated.
Yeah.
For that reason, because it's anti-Soviet propaganda, and they funded the movie to show to kids to keep that still going. So it's just it's hard for me to read, knowing what Orwell did, and then also how much the books are pushed because of their because. To have a book that's negative against propaganda, but then turn around and both his most famous literature works are used as propaganda for the last 60, 70 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to point out at the beginning that this was
was
propaganda, and for anyone who says that it's not, it is.
It is.
That doesn't mean that the messages and the themes and things like that can't align with your own values. Despite it being propaganda, but that it does have a clear message to send, and you can't act like it doesn't.
I think as long as you acknowledge something does have a specific purpose, such as propaganda, as long as you acknowledge that and you view things like, oh, this is clear propaganda, you can still get things from it while having that in the back of your mind.
You can proceed cautiously and deliberately through the material.
Yeah.
With that knowledge, because usually propaganda works best with an unconscious effect that you're going through unknowingly being affected by it.
But also, you saying that about George Orwell, I didn't know that about him, but I think maybe he could have a different character besides Winston that's representing him. And we can keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Because you've read it. But, after you said that, I was like, maybe this other character. I don't know if you know who I'm talking about.
Yes. I'm going to act like I do, so I look smart.
Cool.
That's a great place to stop. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you made it to the end, congrats. That was the marathon. You have 2 to 3 more of these videos to look forward to, and we will see you later. Bye, guys.
Bye.